Welcome back to another week of the True North podcast. With me, as always, is my good friend, Mr. Matthew Finn, over here. Zayden is normally off camera over here running the soundboard, but he's on child duty right now. So that way, there's no interruptions during the podcast. Can't guarantee we still won't get one, though. It's still a possibility. So you might be in for a fun little surprise along the way.
Kids always have to use the bathroom at the most unideal times. We went to start, and then my daughter was like, I got to poop. So it's just like, okay.
All I heard was, Daddy, I got to poo-poo.
Like, all right, guys, just hold off. We gotta go take care of this real quick.
Time out. Poop's very important.
Poop is always important.
Everybody poops. There's a children's book about it. There is somewhere. I can't remember who wrote it, but there's one about it.
The title of today's podcast, Everybody Poops.
So let's get into it. No,
let's get into it. Oh, gracious. Oh, man.
No, today we're actually going to be talking about church and what you would say to be traditions. Yeah, because everybody knows churches have their traditions on, you know, how they worship, how they practice. And then a lot of times it's not even really to do with some of that stuff. It's stuff that really just kind of seems minor that isn't really that big of a deal, to be quite honest. And we have our own kind of personal stories that we'll share about that too. But Matthew, do you have anything specific that you want to talk about as far as church tradition, I guess?
Yeah, I would say so. So at my previous church, you know, we talked about this the other day.
Say their name.
Oh,
no, I'm just kidding. Don't do that.
That
Please
church
don't do that.
I used to go to, great church. But so...
It was so great. Why'd you leave?
Oh, whoa.
We're getting too personal. Too personal. We're not going to get that far.
No, I'm just kidding. So that church at the time, used to do like youth Sundays, you know, where the youth would control the music.
Right.
They control the message. You know, you'd have some youth get up there and speak and, you know, do little sermons.
That's dangerous.
Ours was, you know, I think it was gospel. So it was the anagram of, you know, gospel, G-O-S-P-E-L. And I had G, which was God created us to be with him. So I remember prior to that, you know, we were kind of doing like the Z does. We were playing kind of like music that's more associated with our age group. And so, you know, some people didn't recognize it. And some people were like, oh, that's a little strange to play at church.
The older generation,
right? And so we played this one video, and the whole idea was, you know, don't judge a book by its cover, right? So you had this kind of older car, and it's bouncing up and down. You know, it's playing like, you know, like really loud rap music, but it was more Lecrae. So it was like, you know, godly music, right? And so
for those who don't know who Lecrae is, he is a rapper who is a Christian and talks about Jesus in his music.
Yeah, fantastic music, great message overall. So this car is bouncing and stuff, and like, you know, there's a group of people at church, and they're looking like, what is this person doing? And so the window rolls down, and you see it's this old granny, like age 80, and she's just rocking out to some Lecrae. Good message, and then it flashes across, you know, don't judge a book by its cover, that sort of thing. Well, so the moment the rap music started, we had one of our, you know, older, respectable men stand up. Not respectable at this point, and I kid you not, have a tantrum like a child and say, you know, rap. They're bringing them rap music in the church. I kid you not, those were their words.
Like in the middle of this stuff going on.
Yeah, and just like has a tantrum, red face, stomps all the way back down the aisle, leaves, and his family, you know, sitting there looking like, why did he act this way? And so they leave. They didn't return to their church after that because they said that church was going to become, you know, something that was supposed to be. It's going to be a concert, and here we have just this one video is illustrating this point going forward. And so that was like a bit of an overreaction, I think, to...
It sounds like the video did exactly what she insinuated. It was like, you know, don't judge a book by its cover. And she literally did that exact thing right after the video.
Yeah, immediately responded in a way that was just, you know, unkind. And,
That's
you
crazy.
know, didn't allow the youth to even get forward with our message, which I think was a great day.
Sure.
Because it was me and I believe 4 others. And so we even had somebody, that same person, I think their family had put something in the offering plate. It's like, you know, you shouldn't allow the youth to do that anymore.
Oh my gosh.
You know, that's unbiblical. It's like, okay, unbiblical. Let's, you know, examine that.
That's when you get to them back. Tell me why it's unbiblical. They couldn't tell you.
Right. They couldn't tell exactly. Nope. They couldn't point to the verse. And so I remember my pastor being like, oh, I didn't want you guys to hear about that. But I guess through, you know, the grapevine, it came back to you and you found out about it. And so, you know, that was an example of something that...
Now, was like the pastor mad about it after it all?
Yeah, he wasn't very happy about it. Yeah, not us, but the person.
Oh, about the person. Okay, I thought he was mad at y'all for doing it.
He was like, you know, it's an opportunity for you guys to express yourselves. You're youth. So your music is going to really sound the same as our music does, because, you know, we had, you know, the old white hymnal that we got up and, you know, played the piano. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but...
Traditional.
Yeah, it's traditional, right? And so when you try to go more contemporary, there are people that are like, oh, no, we can't do that. But, you know, it makes me think of back in the day when, you know, those hymnals were coming in sounded like bar music to a lot of people.
Yeah, that's true.
Because that's how the stanzas were. It used to be played in the bars. And so hymnals were even, a little risky at the time.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I don't think David was going, before the Lord with his hymnal open to page 232.
And then dancing with all his might. I don't know how one would dance with all their might to a hymnal. I'm not trying to be rude.
I think of it as like a mosh pit. You're just down there just slinging your head around.
And so, worship definitely looks different for everybody for sure.
No doubt.
And, I knew a few people that, would, raise their hand stuff for hymnals and stuff, like Jesus paid it all, which we sang, at church.
Yeah.
And so, there's always that different interpretation of scripture and then how you respond to it in your heart, and
sure.
Obviously this person responded their heart not so good. So they ultimately left the church, and that's an example of just tradition, like one aspect of worship rather than focusing on the facts like, we're glorifying God, we're coming before God, and it's a youth day. So like, I wouldn't expect, grandma's music to be playing that day. It's going to be that kids' generations of music. And
you kind of know what you're getting into when it says Youth Sunday.
Yeah, Youth Sunday, you're probably not going to, there's probably some words you may not recognize that they say. Kids say all sorts of stuff today that I don't even know what it means. And I've learned so many words that I wish I could just delete from memory. But again, that's an expression of that generation a lot of times. Now, some of it may seem like brain rot, like, I'm not even going to say.
It's like if you don't understand, then most people just automatically tune it off or get into like defense mode. It's like, well, maybe wait a second, let it happen, hear what's going on, and then make an assumption from there. Don't just jump the gun.
Yeah, and if it were something unbiblical, right? So they were saying something that wasn't consistent with God's word, then there would be a problem.
They didn't even give it a chance.
Yeah, they didn't even give it a chance.
They just heard whatever the music was that went with it, and then they just flew off the handle from there.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you had different pastors that have different voices. You're like, I prefer them to say God like God, or we've talked about Jesus. Yeah, so like it's important, I guess, to say like, what is the medium through which it's coming through, right?
Yeah.
So is that person being biblical, or is it an issue of like, they just talk this way, or is it a generational thing? It's like those things aren't sinful per se. You might have a preference towards the way someone talks or a specific type of music, but the God's
neither one are really
it.
wrong. Yeah, but like you say, as long as the gospel's still the gospel in the center of it, then it's fine.
I don't see an issue with it, and that goes into the tradition we've talked about. And our church isn't very, I would say, strict when it comes to what you wear. Like, what I'm wearing here is, it's not the typical garb of somebody on a Sunday. And and then in another church, this is pretty typical, where you tuck in your shirt, or you need to wear a suit and tie. And
I literally wore this to church.
Yeah, so this is what I wore today, but this isn't typical. You could come in with a t-shirt, come as you are sort of thing.
Yeah,
and I think our church is more focused on come as you are and God will make you better. Not saying it's like, after God, I used to wear this, but now I'm wearing Under Armour shirts now. It's just that's not the exact thing we're saying.
It's like I went to church and got saved, and I went from wearing t-shirts to church to a 3-piece suit.
Yeah, as you were walking out, they're like, here's your new 3-piece suit. Like, that's not how it works,
That's not how it works at all. Well, it's funny you say that, because like speaking on what you were talking about with Youth Sunday and the music, I had a similar instance per se. This church that I used to, I guess, kind of intern at to kind of get my foot in the door to youth ministry. They had a pretty decent sized youth group, and it was a lot of like kids that were like from really bad neighborhoods and has, really terrible home lives and stuff like that. Well, I was usually running, I guess what you call our little sound area. There was like a little corner. It had like the little walls. It had the board, computer, all that stuff. And, generally before, we got started, kids are coming in or whatever, you play some music and all that. Well, at the time, I think some like Building 429 was playing or whatever, which is cool. And I was like, I'm going to put on some like, Christian rap music or whatever. So you had like Lecrae, there was Tripoli, all that stuff. Well, I started playing some of that stuff, because I'm like, youth group, this is, probably a good chance to introduce them to like stuff like this, And then I remember I started playing it, and the youth pastor at this church like ran in there. He's like, what is this? And I was like, oh, this is, like Tripoli. He's like a Christian rapper stuff. He's like, oh, we can't be playing this in here. I'm like, no, it's cool. Like, it's not like rap music or whatever. I'm like, it's, gospel centered and all that stuff. He's like, we can't do that. If pastor hears this, he's going to flip out. He's going to be mad and all that stuff. And the youth pastor of this church anyway was kind of like, it sounds bad. It seemed like he was scared of his own shadow, and he was like so nervous. He was like he's like a chihuahua. I was just like, oh, if we do this, the pastor's gonna. I'm like, I don't know how the pastor was towards him about stuff, but apparently he had him like, do this or else sort of deal. It seemed like, but he was like, we got to turn this off. This isn't going to be good. We can't be playing this. And I'm just at the time, I was probably, I don't know, 19 or 20, I guess, and I just didn't understand. I'm like, I don't understand the big deal because
It's strange.
it's gospel centered. So it's like you're not even giving it a chance or listening to it or whatever. And apparently he's not going to give it a chance and listen to it either. So I'm like, at the time, again, I was just an intern. So I'm like, okay, whatever. So I just swapped it back to the regular music and all that stuff. I mean, he was like, you would have thought like he was going to be shot dead in the street if the pastor found out about it. I'm like, bro, but he was always like that about all sorts of stuff. Like, we can't do that because of pastor. And then it was a very cliquish church anyway. And like, I don't want to get into too details about all that kind of stuff. It just wasn't.
I will say, I like the fact that Pastor Ronnie's mentioned that. Who was it? He said he's supported. He didn't necessarily like the music, but he was like, he was there to support them. Do you remember what that band was called?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It was, oh gosh, I can't think of it now.
Well, it wasn't your typical church music. I think it was like, was it metal or scream?
Yeah,
or
it was
something
like,
that?
yeah, metal,
but
hard
Pastor
rock.
Ronnie, not trying to say our pastor's better than yours, but you know what I'm saying. But he went and supported him, although he didn't really agree with that genre of music. But it's still the message of the gospel is being put out, the message of Jesus, and so that's the important thing. But that is interesting.
Yeah, it was. Man, I mean, just very.
I could see if you were like playing like Living on a Prayer or something like that.
That's one like, thing, but it's like it was literally like, and I guess if you don't listen to it, then you don't know. Because a lot of people say that about like the Super Bowl halftime show, because the majority is like, well, I don't understand. This is the worst halftime show ever. I'm like, well, if you don't listen to rap music on the regular, of course you're not going to understand it. That's like if you were, playing like, old timey country music from like the 70s or 80s. Like not all of it's bad
right here.
But like at the same time, a lot of this generation now would be like, oh, this is terrible.
Yeah,
like what is it? Like it's a generational gap thing. It's like obviously you don't like it because it's not your generation. It's not what you grew up on, what you listen to and all that stuff. So that's why you don't like it per se. And that's a lot to do with that. It's like that's all they hear is like the music aspect of it and what they think they know about it already. It's like, yeah, like the worldly side of how that music is, but music is one of those things where you can take it and you can redeem it. You know what I mean? Not everything you can take and redeem. Like you can't have a strip club for Jesus, right?
Yeah,
that doesn't work. But music, I mean, music is it's instrumentals and
unless
whatever
you're stripping
else.
off sin, but then it's still
okay,
that's
Mike
a little too
Todd.
edgy. That's a little
Mike Todd over here.
So like you talk about redeeming stuff, and I talked to you guys about this before, and forgive me, I'm trying to remember what the artist's name was, but it's like the 1 to the 3 to the 4, all the people getting tipsy on the dance floor, something like that.
Oh,
like,
okay, yeah.
Okay, so I'd heard that song. I was like, I don't really like it. Well, then Mike Teasy came out with the, he missed me, and he's talking about Satan.
Yeah,
missing me, and I love that song. It's like the beat is great, and it's like it's a way that he redeemed.
Yeah.
It was a kind of a drunk culture thing.
Sure.
And used it for the Bible, and I think that's good. I think, however, you draw the line when you have something that has a word that's in Christianity, but like the message isn't that. Like we talk about living on a prayer.
Yeah, for sure.
I know other people have mentioned before. They're like, just because it's got the word prayer in it doesn't mean that it's necessarily consistent with the Word of God.
And I've seen videos too of like mega churches like doing like a sermon series, and they played "Living on a Prayer" before. It's like I see what you're trying to do, but it just doesn't work. No. You know what I mean?
See, I think that's a stark difference, right? So we talked about the gospel message, but then trying to take something not meant for the gospel and then kind of force it into that shell.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think it was, and maybe I'm wrong. It was either Perry Noble or somebody. There was a series they were doing and they sang Highway to Hell because they were talking about, life and death and stuff like that. I'm like, again, understand what you're going for there, but that might be crossing the line at a certain point there. Right. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I know, was it Mercy Me? Was it Mercy Me? I'm trying to remember the I Won't Back Down, which is the barn heart. Well, he sang that song and I was like, oh wow. He's like, I'll stand at the gates of hell and I won't back down. It's like, I could see that because there's a little leeway there, right? So you can take a Christian perspective into it, but then it's like, what was the intended meaning by the artist and whatnot? So you have to examine quite a few details on that.
And what's fun about a lot of this too is we're going to have an episode in the next couple weeks after this one talking about like secular music and the Christian life, like how that plays into effect. So some of this will kind of come back. But another point you were making about like how, come as you are, like as you're dressed. I remember one time when I was in youth group, and I was still pretty new to youth group, I guess. It was probably like 2 or 3 years still in. And we went to a some kind of conference thing. It was like a one-night thing at like another church. And like we went, and a lot of times when I was a kid, and even still now, like I just wore like a hat a lot of times, And so I remember we went in, we sat down, we're hanging out with our friends, laughing, cutting up, and somebody, an older person, like came by and like tapped me on the shoulder, like, you need to take your hat off. And I was like, whoa, okay. So I like took it off, but like no explanation as to why. I'm just like, what does it matter? Like even at that age, I'm like, why does it matter if I'm wearing a hat in here or not? And I know a lot of people say like, well, it's a thing of respect, you know, for the Lord to come in and take your hat off. And that was a generational thing too. Like years ago, like if a gentleman entered into a room, he'd take his hat off because he entered into the room. And again, different generation, different time means different things. Like now to me, what I believe is like, I don't think God really cares if I'm wearing a hat in church. Like, I think he cares if I'm there, if my heart is intentional to know him more, like whether I'm wearing a hat or one of them little helicopter spinny hats or whatever. Like, obviously nobody's just going to willingly wear one of those, but like when you're just like regularly dressing, like, you know, Joe Schmo, he's getting up to go to church in the morning, you know, he's just putting on his clothes.
Hat, you know,
you like your trucker hat, and like say it's a guy like maybe he's been out of church for a while, you know, and
that shouldn't discredit him.
It shouldn't discredit him just to be like, oh, you can't wear your hat in here, and it's like, well, why? They're not going to be able to tell you why.
Yeah, so I can relate to that. So like I had a church where that was kind of the thing, but it wasn't like, you know, make or break you. It's like, you know, the Lord's going to throw you out if you don't take the hat off. But it was something we did, like we would take it off. And I still like praying and stuff. I'll take off my hat as reverence.
I'm going to be honest, I don't.
I'm not going to look at somebody that's wearing a hat and be like, you need to take that hat off, or Jesus ain't going to hear what we're going to say. Like, it's just, So, well, I mean, I do it, but it's not like, if someone asks me, this is why I do it, you don't have to do it, but I don't think it really matters. I really don't.
Well, we had an instance, I guess one time last year, it wasn't too long ago, but we were praying before we left, and one of our students, he like took his hat off and he's like, Matt, take your hat off. I'm like, no, I'm good. You know, and he's like, you don't take your hat off to pray? I was like, no. I'm like, now, if you were taught and your parents want you to take your hat off when you pray, I'm like, then you need to do that. If that's what they want you to do. I'm like, me personally, I don't take my hat off. And I'm like, there's a whole explanation I have for it. I'm like, but I'm not going to tell you like, oh, don't take your hat off, bro, you know, and then get him in trouble with his parents. Like, if your parents told you to take your hat off whenever you pray, you do what they ask.
We could be really specific if we wanted. And I mean, even using scriptures like you know, take off your shoes because you're standing on holy ground.
Right, for sure.
Like he told Moses. And so, you know, we could get crazy, and that's just not
some of these churches. I don't know if there's some holy ground in there. If you know what I'm saying.
If we got new carpet, our church are probably like, all right, guys, take your shoes off.
Take your shoes off.
Take your shoes off. Yeah.
No, we got too many coffee stains on some of our carpet. Jeremiah. No, I'm just kidding. Not to throw him under the bus or whatever, but I don't know. I just never understood. Now, obviously, if you've been in church long enough, you know, like not to just be like, oh, I'll just wear my Budweiser t-shirt today. It ain't no big deal. Like
that's probably
like,
a little debatable.
Like if it's somebody brand new who's just trying to get back in church and maybe that's the best they got or whatever, like you don't want to discredit them because it's just like that's what they're wearing. And like if you're like a veteran in church or whatever, if that's even the right word to use, like you know kind of what you shouldn't wear, what you should wear. Like, but me, it's one of those things like whether I'm wearing a hoodie, a hat, or whatever. I'm like, I don't think it really matters to the Lord as long it's about the intent of the heart.
I think so.
I think that's what it boils down to. And a lot of people, they might not own like a button-down shirt or whatever. Like, you know, Jason, who's a member of our church, he wears overalls, right?
Fantastic.
Nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's overalls, right? He's not butt naked, so we're good.
Yeah,
right?
If you're coming in and no pants and a shirt, then we
got to have a conversation then. But
if you're someone visiting the church and say you walked in with a, I don't know, like a scantily dressed girl and it's, you know, a Budweiser thing. Yeah. Sure. Surely you probably should consider that before you church, obviously, a little bit.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's something we'd have a conversation. We probably wouldn't throw you out for it, something like that. Because, again, come as you are. But if you're that church or a person that's going for 2 years, we're like, oh, okay. So we have to represent Jesus.
No doubt.
We do, right? And
I mean,
so
even
you're
on
a
our
mature Christian, you know what I mean?
Even on our church website, like, you know, we have a little section on there if you're like a visitor or whatever. It says like, you know, what to expect essentially. And it tells you like, you know, the parking situation, what we got. But then it says like, you know, a lot of people ask like, hey, you want to come to church with me or whatever? It's like, well, what should I wear? Like, that's always like one of the number one things is like, well, what do I need to wear? You know, and we put on there like it doesn't really matter. You can wear jeans and shorts.
Cargo shorts.
You can wear a suit if you want to. Mm-hmm. You can wear sandals. Like it don't really matter. Like just
for a while there, we had someone dressing up in a suit, like a few people, and then it just the regular doesn't matter.
After a while, it's like some people kind of like I guess sense how everything is around. So like, okay, well, I'll just wear my
we're not walking around like, all right, this guy's good. This guy's good. Oh no, you can't get out.
Yeah, we're not like being picky or whatever. Like if it's one of those things where maybe you have somebody consistently wearing something, maybe a little too like revealing or something, you might have to go biblically wise and just like go with them one-on-one or something like, hey, just so you know, like and
do it in kindness.
Yeah,
at
do
least
it in kindness
the first few times, and then the next time we attack them. And I'm just kidding. No, we don't do that. It's like, how dare you?
And, how dare you? You didn't listen.
Yeah, that kind of goes into the other thing. Of course, obviously we do that in kindness and secret because you don't want to make someone embarrassed, I would say.
Yeah.
But I also like the thing is like we all have a certain place where we sit, but if a new person comes, like typically, I don't know how everyone else feels. Someone might be like, they took my spot. I can't believe it. I've been sitting there for 10 years.
My grandpappy sat in that seat.
Grandpappy sat in that seat. And for me, it's kind of like, oh, they sat in our seat. That's unfortunate. We'll just move a row back.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. Well, same with parking spots. Like, I don't think we have a designated parking spot. Because we'll be like, oh, there's a free spot. And
Yeah,
just,
pretty much. I don't think anybody gets too picky, but
Yeah, I don't think
there's
so.
some things people kind of jump the gun on. Like again, with like the dress or whatever. My nephew, for instance, he was a youth pastor at a church, and he got into a situation one time where he had a girl show up at youth group, and her shirt had like a rainbow on it. Well, some of the older people in the church took that as like, oh, well, she's showing gay pride. I'm like, well, you can't just make that assumption. Like y'all clearly don't know this girl. I'm like, a rainbow doesn't always mean pride. Sometimes a rainbow is just a rainbow.
Yeah.
And then a
My
rainbow is
daughter-
also God's promise and stuff like that. But they went like, because she was a teenager, she's got a rainbow on her shirt. They automatically took it as like, oh, well, that's gay pride, and tried to tell them like, you need to address that situation. And I'm like, that's, I'm
So
like, maybe
Kaylin wears rainbows all the time, but I
Yeah.
don't associate it with that.
nobody associates it with
Yeah.
that, right? But they like put him in like this weird situation to where he felt like he had to say something. And I'm like, I would have just let it go, to be
Yeah.
quite honest. I mean, if she's not running around like,
Choose your battles. So to
yeah,
speak,
pick and choose your battles. And that was one that they were trying to go hardcore into. And it's like, bro,
gracious.
it's like, chill. It's just a rainbow. Like, you don't know what the intention is of that. And she's not saying anything
Might have been-
specific
she
about
likes
anything.
Skittles. Who knows?
Yeah, she might like Skittles,
tastes
It may just be a shirt that she saw and was like, oh, that's a cute shirt. You know what I mean? So it's like, even then, it's like people just are so quick to assume things.
Right, and does that discredit you from like reaching them further in the future?
Oh, absolutely.
To help them towards being like Christ and
No doubt. Well, even still, like Austin, who good friend of ours and member of our church, he told me that one time, I think it was at the church he used to go to, like a gentleman walked in and like turned right back around and went to go leave. And he said, because their carpet in the sanctuary was green, he's like, the carpet doesn't need to be green. It needs to be red to represent the blood of Christ. And said he left because the carpet was green.
What's funny about that is a good friend of mine, his church was like redoing some things. That old fake green carpet they had on the front?
Yeah.
They were taking that up, and some people were really just getting bent out of shape about it. They're like, wait, that's been like that since 1970. We need to keep it.
gosh.
It's like, well, we need to update a little bit. And it's starting to smell. It doesn't look good. It's stained. But yeah, that's insane that you would walk in and base approaching the God of the universe on your carpet, which is
That's what I'm saying. Like, at what point is like, I'm like, where in scripture does it convict your heart enough to be like, the carpet's supposed to be red, not green? Well, even years ago,
Ours was blue side, our old church, so we're already gone.
to be fair, ours is red. We're biblically accurate.
Oh jeez, oh no.
Oh no. But I remember when we first started going to church years and years ago, like the church when we first started attending was called Morgan Memorial Baptist Church. Well, then we got a new pastor a couple years in because our other one left to go somewhere else. And he came in and he's like, I want us to, fit in and represent the community a little bit better, for people to recognize us, know where we're at. So we're in the Cherrydale area in Greenville, if you know where that is, right? Cherrydale shopping centers and all that. We were near there essentially. So they brought it to a vote, did a lot of thought and prayer through it. And so they changed the name from Morgan Memorial to Cherrydale Church because we were in the Cherrydale community. Well, we had older members get upset and we're essentially like, well, Mr. Morgan would be rolling over in his grave if you knew you changed the name of his church. And our pastor, Marcus Buckley, that dude, he's awesome. He is so cool. But he told them, he was like, I don't think Mr. Morgan would really care right now because he's dead, obviously. He's like,
He's with the Lord.
yeah, he's with the Lord. He's like, I don't think Mr. Morgan would really care. And they didn't like his particular answer, so they left the church over the changing the
just
name
a
of the
comment.
church just to fit in. Like, the intent was great. It's like, we're in the Cherrydale community. We want to, show the community, hey, we're here and all that kind of stuff. And then he told him too, he's like, first of all, this isn't Mr. Morgan's church. This is God's church.
Right.
So it was like, he kind of really put them in their place and they left because of just something like that.
That's so petty. I mean, I'm trying to, I ain't going to call a duck what it is, but it's a duck.
I'm glad they didn't stick around for long because at a certain point we outgrew our sanctuary and we had to move into the gymnasium and we got the stackable chairs and stuff. If they had stayed long enough, they would have freaked. We can't meet in a gymnasium.
Well, it's funny you say that because like, my old pastor, like the church that burned down, and this is before me and, before I started going there. He talked about, he goes, it would be a great opportunity to reach the community around us if we built a gymnasium rather than a church. And obviously we could still meet in it, still be a building.
Yeah.
but it'd be great because, you know, it'd reach the community people, and they're like, no, a church has to be a church. It has to have a sanctuary, a vestibule, all that stuff. And they eventually like did it that way because people voted that way.
Yeah.
You know, he talked to me like some years down the road. He's like, you know, I regret the fact that I, you know, kind of bent on that. He's like, and it, you know, was a sanctuary. He's like, it would have been great. He's like, there was actually a gym built pretty close to this location, and it's, you know, it's doing great, but
That's great.
yeah, could have been a great opportunity for outreach. Like really any community you have, if you have like, you know, people that need that sort of thing or don't have a place to play, like that would get them in the door towards, you know, learning about the Bible. And
absolutely. Well, even take our church, for example, you know, we had to take the steeple off the top because we had to fix the roof because we were having leaks where the steeple was at. So got the steeple taken off the top of the roof, and it sat in the front of the church for a little while, and they got the roof fixed. And well, then the debate was like, well, I don't know, it kind of looks good without the steeple, you know? And, you know, one of the big things too is like, well, you know, the steeple was causing leaks, you know, should we put it back up there and let it try to cause more leaks, even though we got a new roof? And it wasn't really one of those things that anybody fought or argued over. It was just like, do we really need it back up there? Because if we put it back up there, we could get more leaks again, potentially. But if we don't put it up there, is it really a big deal? I'm like, do you have to have a steeple? And I know some people would make the argument like, well, then how are you going to know it's a church? Like, well, there's a sign out front first that says Northside Church. That's one reason to tell. But at the same time, it's like, you know, who made the rule? Again, it's traditional that a church has a steeple on the top.
Well, you know what the steeple was symbolic of originally? It's like being the closeness to God. So like, and then skyscrapers started to happen. They're like, well, there goes that one. But,
well, there's a lot of churches trying to be close to God that's got steeples that aren't so close to God.
Yeah, just because you're taller like the Tower of Babel doesn't mean you're...
If that's the case, then I'm going to hell because I'm short. I can't reach God.
Wow. That's
how we want to play it.
That's got really
And that's how they want to play it. So you're good, man.
All tall people are good.
You're good because you can reach God.
Don't take that out of context. Yeah, there's going to be a clip somewhere of that.
There's going to be
like, look what they
obviously,
said.
Obviously, we're joking, obviously. But I mean, people really do get
take seriousness in that. So
they really get uptight
we just need
about
to wear
traditions.
Stilts and walk around and look.
Yes,
like we're
everybody's got to be the same height. And good to go. But no, people, and it kind of shows you like all this stuff we're talking about, like this is true stuff that happens, that has happened with us or it has happened over time. Like people really get caught up in the tradition of like what church is quote unquote supposed to be. And the church isn't necessarily supposed to be this or supposed to be that. The only thing about the church is you're supposed to be able to come as you are, live your life out for Jesus, make disciples so that you can go out and still make disciples. Like as long as the gospel is the center, right? That's the most important thing, right? Now, again, there's some play with that because, again, you can't have like a strip club church back. Well, the gospel's the center of it. Well, clearly it's not, or else you wouldn't be a strip club church, which one of those does exist. I heard a story about it not too long ago. You can probably look it up on Google.
Club church.
Yes. It was essentially, well, no, it wasn't exactly a strip club. It was a swingers church is what it was, where, you know what people know what swingers are, but it was a swingers church where people could, you know, do their thing or whatever. And they're like, oh, well, the gospel. I'm like, well, if you're doing that, the gospel's not the center. If the gospel is truly the center of your church, then obviously that's not happening.
You don't need that little tagline on there.
Yeah, for sure.
It's the center.
I mean, it shouldn't matter what color the carpet is, what color the walls are painted, whether you got a steeple or not, whether you wear a hat or a suit or flip-flops or whatever. Like the intent is supposed to be, hey, we're all a bunch of sinners in need of a savior, coming together to be a community to encourage and uplift one another, correct one another if need be, you know, and all strive to be more like Jesus.
Right.
As long as we're doing that,
like,
then I don't see why we get so nitpicky about the smile. And that's what drives a lot of non-believers away from the church.
They see that division and the fighting and the...
That's all they see. Because obviously, if you're going to see anything like drama draws people...
Yeah, it does.
I mean, look at all the drama series there are on TV, the docu-series stuff there is. Like, drama draws people in, and it gets people talking. So you go to church and you have, you know, so-and-so like, you can't sit there because that's where I sit. My dad sat there, my grandpa sat there. That's going to be their idea of church, and they're going to leave, and that's what they're going to get from it. Same ordeal as, you know, another short little story, like years and years ago, interning at the same church. Again, it's youth group. They're teenagers, so, you know, youth pastors teach them. These two girls are talking or whatever. Well, he tells the girl, essentially, he's like, listen, you need to leave and you can't come back until I talk to your parents. Now, again, mind you, it's a bad part of town, and these parents don't give a crap whether this girl's going to church or not. This is probably her only safe place to be away from home, essentially. Well, she leaves, and I'm sitting there for a minute, and something just didn't sit right with me with all that stuff. So I get up and, you know, I like go after her, and she's like in the parking lot because she was walking home. And I'm like, listen, if you want to come back inside and listen, like if he has something to say about it to me later, I'll deal with it, you know. But if you want to come back inside, you're more than welcome to come back. She's like, no, it's cool. They don't want me here, whatever. And maybe after that, that's the picture of what she got of what the church is. Not just that church in particular where we were at, but maybe like every church. You know what I mean? So after that day, I mean, I never saw her again. And did she ever step foot in another church after that? Because she's like, well, if this is how church is, then. But then my whole thing, what made me so angry, I'm like, they're teenagers. They're going to talk during your lesson or whenever. That's what they're going to do. But to say that you can't come back
until I say so,
I'm like, what is this, public school?
Wow.
Like, I mean, and I just, and after, not long after that, I kind of got out of there because I was like, I kind of see like they're not willing to see the error. And I'm not saying I'm completely right about everything, but in that case, I was just like, if they're not willing to open their eyes and see, you know, where their problems are with how they handle things and what they believe is, you know, scripturally based right or wrong and stuff, just again, the little traditional things that they think need to be done. I'm like, I just don't think, one, I'm going to be able to serve here because I'm going to get pushed back too much on, even for the little things that I did try, just a simple little song, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So not long after that, we kind of got out of there and stuff, and it was just really heartbreaking. But
it makes me think like the purpose of the church, and you know, we've talked about the different definitions that people have kind of tried to label it, and like the whole purpose of the church is for sick people. We're like a hospital. So, you know, obviously Christians, we come for checkups, right? And make sure we're still doing the things we need to stay healthy and, you know, follow the gospel. But we're also different in the fact that we go out, right? So we're going out and trying to give people the cure, so to speak, not to be too cheesy. I think that was my throat or something.
Oh, no.
And so we completely miss the mark when we have people that are sick that are coming and we're like, oh, you can't be here because you're sick. It's like, but that's the whole purpose of the church.
Right.
We're there for the sick. And, you know, even Jesus said that. He goes, I'm here for the sick, not for the healthy.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's like the bleeding woman, you know, coming to Jesus where they're like, oh, you can't be near him. Don't touch him. It's like, but she needs him more. Clearly y'all need him, but she desperately needed him, and her faith alone just to touch the hem of his cloak was enough to heal her. And even he told her, you know, it wasn't you touching my cloak, it was your faith, what it was that healed you. And that's the kind of people that the church is supposed to be for, people who are, you know, desperately sick, you know, spiritually, who need to come and just need to reach out to Jesus. And then
who are we as people to touch the holy altar of God in that way and like profane it and push people away when they have an opportunity to hear the message of the gospel?
The modern church, the way it is now and how it was perceived back then around Jesus' time, isn't a lot different. Like, you still got the nitpicky people who were stuck on tradition and this is the way we've always done it and this is what you don't do. And then you got the people that are like, you know, listen, I understand, like, you know, maybe this is how you did it and stuff and how to do it, but necessarily what we're doing isn't wrong either. You know, it's, you adapt with the times a little bit, but you can adapt with the times without changing the message. So you can, you know, change things up along the way to fit with the next generation or whatever to, you know, get their attention.
To use sand as an example with fishing, right? You're not always going to use the same lure to, you know, fish for people. So obviously you have to change things up a little bit. You might use a spoon bait. You might use rooster tail. You might use live bait, whatever it takes to get people in. I'm sure Sandon will appreciate those references at some point. Maybe he'll put a picture of what each thing.
I'm sure, that
would be funny for a clip. But
well, it was funny. We watched the video Wednesday in youth group this past Wednesday, and it was essentially like some guys that I went to high school with. They had a hip hop group for Jesus, and it was called, they were Brave Hearts for Christ. And they made rap music for Jesus, and they ended up on the news for it. Well, then they went to this local Christian CD store at the time, and it was run by older people, and they were like, I just don't think that attracts the young people. Well, the interviewer asked the one, and he's like, well, what would you play to bring in the younger generation? And she struggled. She had like her little keyboard, and she started playing stuff. She's like, well, no, let me try. And I was like, see, you even know, honestly, without actually admitting it, that what you're doing is not going to work. And what they're doing is working because it's bringing kids to church and bringing them, at least getting them curious about Jesus. You know what I mean? But again, it's, well, this isn't how we do it. You know, it's like there's a generational gap. But again, you can change with each generation without changing the gospel.
Yeah, I think like even messages as far as preaching too, you have to consider your audience. And that's one of the main things we talk about. Like if you're preaching, whether you're doing a lesson in school or whatever it is, you have to consider your audiences. Like, how do you engage them the best towards the idea or thing that you're trying to put forward? And
absolutely,
you know, for us, obviously we're talking about salvation. We're trying to bring them into a relationship with Jesus. And so we need to consider that heavily as we are creating like lessons and whatnot.
Right. Again, it's one of those things, whatever situation arises, you got to pick and choose those battles for sure. Like obviously there's a tradition isn't always the right thing. Doesn't necessarily make it wrong. You know, if, you know, you want your carpet a certain color, like that's y'all's prerogative if you want to change the color.
Yeah,
of it.
I don't think God is like sitting down in heaven. It's like they chose the green carpet over the red. Oh no.
Yeah, it's not a big deal.
I don't think that's a big deal.
It's like it's not necessarily what you were doing is necessarily wrong. Maybe your thought process about it is wrong. Just like
Now,
how
if you're getting a cross and turn it upside down on the stage, yeah, that probably isn't too great.
I don't
or
know
something
because
like that.
Peter was
But Peter,
crucified
yeah.
upside down. So what if that's the example they're trying to set?
You know, you know,
That's a different story.
that's a whole different discussion. Yeah.
But anyway, what we're saying is tradition's not necessarily wrong, but you know, to adapt with the times too, with generations isn't necessarily wrong either. It's just
Right.
one generation doesn't understand the other. It's a generational gap, and it's probably one of those wars that's always going to be fought. But again, that's why you still have traditional churches around, and you have a little more modern contemporary churches that are around. And everybody goes to which one that they feel that they can grow and worship in more, whether they have the right intentions about it or not. Not throwing shade on either one.
Jesus doesn't meet exclusively of Northside, but we'd love to have you. But
That
there
is
are other
true.
churches that, you know,
For
Jesus
sure.
is there. So
As long as you're getting plugged into your local church, you're growing spiritually, you're building a community around you of people that you can go to and stuff. That's what's important for sure.
better have red carpet.
Better have red carpet or else bad
Or
things
else.
for you. So, but yeah, that's kind of just what we wanted to talk about. Like, because we know probably people in our lives that go to a more traditional style church or have more traditional style stuff. Again, that's great for you if that's what works for you. But necessarily, what's more modern and contemporary isn't necessarily wrong either. Again, pick and choose your battles and all that stuff. So, but all the examples we're given are stuff that we've known personally that have happened for sure. But you just got to be a little careful. Like, just again, find a church that you know you and your family can be a part of, where you're going to grow spiritually, and that'll be great for sure. But other than that, next week I believe we'll get into. We were going to talk about what we talked about a little bit earlier. Is like secular music and the Christian. Like, is it right? Is it wrong? Ooh. Tune in for that one. It's going to be a doozy too. It's funny because I'm wearing a secular band hoodie right now.
Well,
so
you know, just wearing the generic plaid.
Generic plaid. That's a metal band, generic plaid.
Is it really?
No, it's not. Just kidding.
I was like, wow.
Just kidding.
I just came up with that fly.
Thank you. Go to quit.
But thank you guys for joining this week, and we'll catch you next time.
Absolutely.